So what we're going to do in our remaining moments is we're going to go to an ad lib time. There are four folks here. Julie is going to come back, Larry Good, myself, and Nan Travers. And we decided in a conversation yesterday that we're not going to have any canned remarks. What we're going to do is each one of us is going to try to identify up to maybe 3 takeaways from the conversation and do what we can as sort of a synthesis. And feel free to add in the chat if you think we're forgetting things. that would be fine. And we're going to start with Julie.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Well, all right.
It's
Well,
ad lib
time. Thank you. I think the 3 panels were just so excellent. So thank you all for your participation, your thoughts. I want to go back to something that Denis Fu said about the power dynamics here, because I think that it kind of weaves together these ideas of transparency and context. Think about the system we have right now. It doesn't work for anyone. Higher ed says it doesn't work for these reasons. Employers say that it doesn't work for these reasons. We've got learners that don't know anything about what's going on in some instances. So we really have to think about that power dynamic. If nothing's working, then we have to chart an entirely new path. I would say that having input, like from some of the folks that have been mentioned here and in the chat is incredibly important. But really going back to the fundamentals here and talking, like we all know Amy's work around the credit hour, that it was, initially a measurement of faculty retirement, right? And so to spin out some of these ideas and, and really get beyond we've always done it this way, this is how we're going to do it. We really need to challenge these systems and look at new ways of doing things. I know, Melanie from Acro and I have been, threatening to do something, like to do some projects around this, simply because these are big, huge issues. These are big ecosystem issues that need to be addressed. I think events like this and all of the folks here talking about this, talking about context, talking about transparency is incredibly important, because these are the conversations that we can take back to our constituencies to say, how are you supporting transparency in the credentials that you build? How are you, putting these in context within your regional employers? And how are you engaging them? I would say that I've been the person in the past, the higher ed person that has bought the 6-foot sub and invited my employers in to have lunch and to talk about curriculum. And it's not necessarily had a great impact, simply because we're not talking to the right people. We're not getting in front of hiring managers. So this really has to be a really concerted effort to move in these directions and to have 100% participation from everyone that's in this ecosystem.
So Larry, you're next.
Thanks, Holly. So I come away with a couple of things that really sort of interconnect across the 3 panels. We've wound up, I think themes wound up evolving. One is to understand that we are in somebody used the term chaos and dynamic, and constantly changing. The terminology isn't precise because we're in the middle of a reinvention going on. And we're all sort of making up the next steps from different angles as we're going along and trying to add more precision. So being patient with that is going to be part of this, and knowing that not everyone's going to use the same word exactly the same way, and doing the underlying work to say, when I use this word, that's what I mean, is going to be important for a good while yet. And new terms will solidify as time goes on. But understanding where we are in a change process, I think, is important in this, and that it's the ambiguity around some of the terminology is simply a symptom of that. It's not from lack of rigor or care. It really is about trying to make sense out of things in the moment and trying to be more precise as we go. The other one is that the importance of inclusion. That I've been in this almost a decade, starting in meetings that Lumina called back in about almost a decade ago. And many people that are in this virtual room today have been in many of those other rooms and have done incredible work on different angles of this. And the work is going on in some really, really powerful ways. I do believe what several of us were talking about in the chat, that competencies, skills are the DNA of the future. It is absolutely an unstoppable movement ultimately, because it's going to be the basis of hiring, the basis of labor market transactions, and the basis of learning denomination over time. We're way on the way to that. But the question of, as that work is being done, are the right voices at tables? Are the right conversations happening to ensure that this isn't an elitist movement that works really well if you go to Harvard and doesn't work so well if you go to a very different kind of school or don't go to a university at all? And how we use this opportunity to really do the asset-based work talked about. And every person has competencies. Are we counting them? Not very often. And especially if they don't have formal credentials. So how do we start thinking about how those can be credentialed, how they can be captured, and how we think about this as a continuum where in a world of lifelong learning, competencies are at the core.
Thanks, Larry. And I can't do 3, so I'm going to do 5. Apologies. I'll try to go fast. So the first one I had on my list, Paul Gaston wisely reminded us, this is not only about undergraduate education, this is about graduate education also. And although most of the conversation, I think when we get into credentialing issues, tends to be about sub-baccalaureate certificates and badges and micro pathways, et cetera, we all need to think about the graduate level issues as well in this context of incremental credentialing. The second one is something that Cynthia Proctor reminded us, the importance of state statute and actually setting the language, because once the language gets set by states, for example, we're all left to try to do the interpretations, even while faculty and others are making up new synonyms. So the state policy side of the shop and the language issues are really, really important. The third one, and Karen Elsie, I think, underscored this, is employers are not understanding the diverse words we're using. We're going to need lots of tools and ways to describe to employers what do these words mean when candidates for jobs show up with this array of language on there, whether it's an e-wallet or a traditional transcript or whatever they have to describe their resume, essentially. The fourth, in my mind, is what Deb Everhart reminded us about, the importance of machine readable tools. And so we can't really have a linked data system if some of our terms are not machine readable. Well, mostly I can assure you that the terms that I was curating and putting into that list that you all saw, most of those are not machine readable terms. and even so, folks are not using them and they're not submitting the data. But we're going towards a system in which we're going to need linked data. And that leads me to my to the fifth point. Actually, I have 6, and that Naomi reminded us about the importance of data. We're going to have to pull all this together so we can look at outcomes and the metrics that many of you commented on. So data is going to be very rich and key in this, and language is going to be important because we have to code things. So again, this is the challenge ahead of us. And the last one I'll mention is what Tina raised about asset framing, being positive, ensuring that that's not only part of the definitions and in that document that we're putting together, it's not just the definition of terms, it's the concepts, it's the use of, the context of. And so in that kind of in that use of language, we have to be very mindful of asset framing. And so those are the things that have jumped out to me. And I just want to thank everybody for the amazing contributions today. And we're going to close with Nan, you're going last, and then you will close us out as well.
Thank you so much. And I do have to say, I also have more than 3 items, so I will try to be succinct with it. But I think one of the points that was made is really understanding our end goal. And by keeping that end goal well-defined and in front of us, then the other pieces seem to be that they fall into place. And I think that's an important piece of this. With that, there are a few things that I think we have to be very conscious of as we're developing that end goal and aiming ourselves to that goal. And what has been brought up all along is making sure the voice of all the stakeholders are there. And as part of that, to really understand the power of language, the power came up. It really, depending on the language we're using, we actually determine what's included and what is not included. And defining what's not included includes who are part of that group that's not included. And so we, in all of this discussion, and I think, when Larry said that, we're not always going to have our language, it's being invented, it's not always going to be right, that we need to contextualize it, is that we need to also be very careful about, in that contextualization, that we're aware of what kinds of lines we're drawing in the sand and be really thinking about that. When we talk about really making sure that the kind of the end goal is to be able to connect all of people's learning and being able to credential so that we can signal out there what people know and can do, that again, we need to be thinking about the different ways that we can credential. One of the things that brings up that wasn't mentioned so far, but I think is also an important part of this, is thinking about how we assess learning. Because as soon as we go through an assessment process, because we're saying, we're recognizing they have the learning, we're going to validate they're having the learning, and then we're going to credential that learning, and we're putting it within all of these different contexts. The way in which we do that validation, again, will define what is in and what is out. And as we start to look at additional concepts and language that we are working on in that whole learn and work ecosystem, the assessment and the ways in which we approach that is going to be very critical, because again, we assess what we value, and as soon as we put a value on something, we've defined it in a certain way that does have power over something else. And so these are things that we really need to be paying attention to. I'm just going to quickly check to see if Julie, Holly, or Larry, do you have anything else you would like to add?
Well, the only thing I would add is what is for this large audience that has joined us today. As you think ahead, are there other groupings of terms that are particularly problematic in the context, the networks in which you work? We would like to identify them, because Nan's going to explain kind of what might be coming next. So be thinking about the terms that you think are most complicated. And enough said for me.
Okay, so what's next? We have recorded this. We will be pushing this out. We also are moving to have a lot of this on our website. So there'll be, we'll be sending you to a link to be able to listen to this and share it out. So that will be coming down the pike. We are collecting all of those comments that you made in the chat. They are also being recorded. And so what we are going to do is to take our comments from our panelists and the comments in the chat and start to lay out some of these pieces. And what we hope to have, we've asked the panelists to be, and they have said they are willing to work with us on maybe writing some blogs that take out further this work even further. The other thing is as you noted, this was a very fast 90 minutes. I could barely keep up. And we knew that this was only going to be scratching the surface, that there is so much more to be thought about, that everything we talked about today, there are lots more conversations that need to happen. And so this is really a beginning of the conversation. It was really to kick off a conversation. And so we will be doing additional pieces. And as Holly said, if there are particular areas that you think are valuable for us to be addressing, we're hoping to put together over the period of our Credential as You Go initiative, but also beyond, a lot of dialogue around this. So we are now at the close of our time, and we appreciate everybody for joining us. We are extending the definitions document. So if you could review that in your spare time and give us feedback, that would be helpful. If you think that we're missing some places that need to be added, we know this is a draft, that this is an evolving piece. And we expect, over years it will continue to evolve. But if there are certain sections that you think need more work, we're missing something, maybe you think we've overkilled it in one area and that we could just leave that be. However, we would love your input on that. And so we thank you very much for joining us today. And as I said, we will be pushing out more information to all of you. Please feel free to share this with your colleagues as well. And thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.